To read the Bible in a year, you need 30 minutes to listen or read and 5 days each week. Join us here at St.Andrews for Bible in a Year.
Welcome to Midweek 10.
Midweek 10. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Does that feel weird saying it?
So weird. I mean, it's December 23rd.
Yeah. Christmas is in 2 days. And I don't think either of us are at the new year yet.
Well, wherever you are on this day, may it begin well. So we today are going to talk about the first half of Numbers.
Right.
Or Numbers 1 through 14?
Yeah,
14-ish.
15-ish, yeah.
Yeah. How many chapters are there in Numbers?
36.
Okay, so not quite halfway.
Sorry, I cheat and put a bunch of little cliff notes on the... right at the beginning of the book.
Also the bookmark, which, by the way, we're going to need a new bookmark really soon.
Yes, we are. Those are set and ready, and we'll get those printed off in the next couple weeks and out.
All right.
So...
All right, so we're doing the first part of Numbers.
How do you feel about Numbers?
I like
coming
Numbers.
out of Leviticus.
I mean, better.
Better?
It's better than Leviticus. There's still some sections that I'm like, okay, I mean, what was it? There was like chapter 4 and chapter 5. I'm like, okay, all right. We still have some Leviticus-like stuff, but
See, to me it feels like it's Leviticus, but with a little more context. And not all the law up front all at once.
yeah, there's some woven in, but I can handle that. To me, I like to... So, Leviticus 9, I love. And I think it's a good place to, hold as a marking point.
Okay.
So, you have that's where it talks about the cloud. And on the day that the tabernacle was set up, the cloud covered the tabernacle. And so we have the coming together of all of that stuff we read about the tabernacle. And then the cloud, which is the presence of God coming down. So in the evening, it was over the tabernacle with the appearance of fire until morning. And so it always was. The cloud covered it by day, the appearance of fire by night. And when the cloud lifted from the tent, after that the people of Israel set out. And in the place where the cloud settled down, the people of Israel camped. So to me, that's what's going on in Numbers. That's continually going on. And then we have this other stuff. But this time when I listened to it, chapter 1, I'm going along. I'm listening as I'm driving along. And all of a sudden I'm like, that tribe had 56,000 men over the age of 20? That's so many.
Which tribe in particular? Cause...
it doesn't even matter, because then you get to the fact that just the people who are here in the wilderness, just the men over 20, were 603,550.
And that's only the 11 tribes, because that's not counting the Levites as well.
Right.
Sorry, I was doing the math on all that and following along, and it's, oh wow, it's a lot more people than I thought.
Usually I imagine it about the size of my college, which was 1,200 people.
This is the size of a city.
This is 1 million people.
Yeah.
1 million people that when a cloud lifts, they all pack up and follow it. And then there's all that precise packing of the tabernacle and all of that.
Well, and then, okay, so how often do you imagine they're moving? That was one of the questions I had as I was going through, it was later in Numbers 3, where they're breaking up the tribes of Levi and their responsibilities for moving.
Yes.
Sorry, maybe that's 4. But where they're breaking up what is... how they move, what they move, how they're responsible for the whole of the tabernacle. How often do you think they were moving?
See, okay, so my microwave broke on Friday. So, of course, I already feel defeated. So I call my dad, and he's like, okay, well, come see if I can help. And it has one of those trim kit things and all of that. So it's a huge pain. So while we're driving around trying to figure out how to deal with all of this, Dad and I were talking a little about numbers. And when we were talking about it, he was saying, which makes a lot of sense, they have to move every time they need more grazing land for the livestock. Because you have 1 million people.
That's
and
a lot.
how much livestock? Like, they're going to eat it down, and then you got to go. So, I mean, that's an interesting consideration. Like, how often do they move? How long does it take for the livestock to eat whatever they can forage before they have to go again? And then when they go, it's got to be like this trickle effect, right? Like, there's the group that goes first, and then the other while the Levites are packing stuff up, and everyone has to pack stuff up. And it says who's at the rear guard, right? And then it's, well, how do you know where you stop? Because the cloud has to be with the tent in the middle, but then you have to know how much farther forward you have to go to be the edge, so that's the center. I mean, it actually feels very complicated to me.
Yeah.
It's not like I ever imagined, like, the cloud rises, okay, here we go, but I'm thinking, like, maybe 1,000 people, right? I don't know why I've always imagined that. It so clearly says it's basically 1 million people.
I think it's easier to imagine it as 1,000 because the logistics.
That's all I can grasp.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, the logistic of just moving pieces of what we do in the church here, that's a lot.
By the way, we should put the sign out for Christmas Eve.
Oh, I guess we should.
Yeah.
It's in 2 days. Happy New Year.
It's honestly so hard to think about the logistics of moving all of that.
So your dad does bring up an interesting point. I never considered it within the thought of the livestock. I always thought it would be seasonal moves.
I don't think so. I think it's more than that.
No, yeah.
And there's some pieces in it that it's like when maybe we should talk about that. When they have to wait for Miriam. She has to be outside the camp for 7 days, and they don't go for 7 days. Just the way that writing is, it makes it seem like that's against the normal pattern. Like, normally they would have been going. That's in, like, what is it? 13, 12. Yeah. Let's just switch to that section for a little bit. So, I mean, we'll just go skip around. But what really stuck out to me listening to it was, now the man Moses was very meek, more than all the people who were on the face of the earth. I don't know why that surprised me so much. When I think of Moses, I don't necessarily think of meek.
No, because you have later in Scripture where Moses is saying, I'm as strong as I was when I was 40 or whatever age it is. So I don't picture him as a meek man. But I guess, going back into Exodus, his reply to God is, who am I that anyone would listen? And that seems like the pattern of what God... Okay, this is a lesson that I saw from a youth director years ago. When you think of Samson, what do you think of?
Well, long hair.
Yeah.
I picture probably someone who's about 6'2", and strong, agile, a little flighty.
Yeah. This youth director made an argument that the image that we always have, that traditional one of Samson as a strong man, it doesn't fit with what God does. And Samson would have looked more... He made the argument for Pee Wee Herman. That he would have looked like Pee Wee Herman with long hair, skinny and flighty and goofy, and the strength that he had could only be attested for from God. So, I mean, that might be in that same category.
We'll have to revisit this when we get to Judges.
Yeah, but I mean, that puts Moses maybe in that same category of... He is a wispy man because, again, it testifies to God's actions in his life rather than his own strength.
Interesting. Yeah, that really jumped out at me, though. Moses was very meek. And so Miriam and Aaron are in trouble because, basically they say, has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not also spoken through us? So it's a little bit like, what about me? right? And it doesn't go very well.
Well, and even opposing him on who he married,
Yeah.
which it feels like we've been in the desert for a bit and some things have been established. Why are you objecting to this now?
Yeah. I don't know. So in the midst of it, God calls all three of them to the tent, right? I mean, these are the siblings. We got Miriam, Aaron, and Moses right there. And so Miriam and Aaron go in, and God, is very upset. And when they leave, Miriam has leprosy. And Moses intercedes, and basically God said, 7 days. She has to have this for 7 days. And so she goes out of the camp, and they stay there for 7 days and didn't set out. So that's the thing. The people did not set out on the march until Miriam was brought in again, which makes me feel like they normally would have. Maybe I'm reading into it. So how often do they travel? I don't know. But it's 1 million people, and how much livestock, and how much stuff, and this very intricate tabernacle. What kind of job would you want if you were in the wilderness with the Israelites? I don't think I want to be packing up the tabernacle.
I think I want to be
really
somewhere out
hard,
with a herd.
Right?
Okay, so I remember how much it took for us to set up for creation.
Oh.
To get the canopy up, to get the tents up, to get the kitchen and the living space. And that was, 20 of us.
For 5 days.
Mm-hmm. And like moving something like that every, say, 3 days. I mean, that feels like a lot. Because you got to march, you got to set up, and then I guess not just collapse and help get dinner going. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, we're really kind of down a rabbit trail because I don't think it says the answer, so we're just guessing. I mean, it could be every 7 days. It could be every month. I don't know.
We're speculating from our position and the exhaustion it is.
Yeah, it's just a lot.
And they did this for 40 years.
Yeah, well, they do it for 40 years because...
But I mean... Sorry, I'm saying that because there's that yearning that has to be the desire for permanence.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of why. Which brings us to 13.
Yes. So right after this, then Moses sends spies, is what it says, into the land of Canaan. And they have this charge. They're supposed to go up into the Negev and the hill country, see what the land is, and whether the people who dwell there are strong or weak, or whether they're few or many, and whether they dwell in a land that is good or bad. And then it's like, be of good courage and bring some of the fruit back from the land. So, and it tells us each one who goes, right? And, okay, I have to admit, I tried to underline them, and I got 11, and then it says, and Moses called, Joshua. So is Joshua the 12th, or was Joshua the 13th, and I missed one?
I think Joshua is the 12th, because it would be
Okay.
the 12 tribes. But
he's not listed as with a tribe.
Well, because Joshua was kind of right alongside Moses often, but you have earlier Hoshea, the son of Nun, and Joshua, son of Nun.
Yeah.
So
it's just a different pattern, so it's hard to know. So at least 12. Right? And so they're given this charge, and they go in. And I don't think I'd realized they were there for 40 days.
Well, I mean, they're getting the full lay of the land, the cities. They're traveling as foreigners.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so they come back.
Nope, can't do it.
And 10 of them are like, the land's great. No way. I mean, it's like they're so strong. And then Caleb's like, no, let's go. Let's go up at once and occupy the land, for we'll be able to do it. And then the other 10 men are like, no. They all basically get to the point where they're like, those people are like giants.
Which, again, I mean, they just conquered Egypt.
Fled. Not much. There was not that much conquering. Pillaged.
Pillaged Egypt without bloodshed, and God conquered Pharaoh and all of his armies. Would that be fair?
Yeah.
And I mean, that's maybe a year on because we have.
It's not that long.
Yeah, we have chapter 9 that is the Passover celebrated. So we're a year or two on.
Well, somewhere it says 2 years, 2 months.
Okay.
I don't remember where.
And this is still fresh enough in their memory that there's a part of me that just kind of marvels at that of, okay, wait a minute. Again, you had Egypt conquered by God, who's going before you in a pillar of cloud and fire. I'm with Caleb.
Yeah. Well, that's good. You should be.
Well, yeah.
God wants everyone to be with Caleb, but all the congregation weeps and they, cry out this refrain, right? Would that we have died in the land of Egypt. And why is the Lord bringing us to this land to fall by the sword? And then here we go. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt? And it doesn't stop there. I'm like, whoa, like I'm starting to write notes in my margin, right? It says, let us choose a leader and go back to Egypt.
How many times did they say that? We're hungry.
This is the only time I remember, though, them saying, hey, let's go choose a leader and go back, right? Which is like, we're just going to ignore Moses. We're just going to do our own thing. We're going to split. All right, so it's not a surprise that God's angry.
Yeah.
I think what is a surprise in the midst of this, though, is this verse 18 in chapter 14, that this is the context for the Lord is slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, forgiving iniquity and transgression. But, and I have to say, well, I've used this in worship a lot. I've never used the but. But he will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the father on the children. And so then, it's very clear later that none of the generation, except for Caleb, is going to see the land.
Well,
and
Caleb and
possess it.
Joshua.
I know, but only Caleb gets mentioned somehow.
Oh, yeah.
See, but my servant Caleb.
Interesting.
Yeah. So he gets set apart.
He does, and he's kind of that right hand to Joshua in that coming campaign. Mm-hmm. Huh. Is there a part where Joshua has been set apart beforehand in this? Sorry, I'm
I don't know.
pulling one of those story strings.
1438. Well, this is the part where the men who brought a bad report from the land, they died by a plague before the Lord. And of those men who went to spy out the land, only Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, remained alive. So there he's grouped with it.
I'm just thinking ahead where it feels like Joshua keeps remaining as this background character until everything passes from Moses to Joshua.
Yeah, because
Towards the end
Joshua
of
doesn't,
Numbers.
we don't hear a report from Joshua, we hear Caleb's report.
So it's just assumed that maybe he's Moses' guy.
I don't know. But Caleb gets
He gets the moment.
yeah.
And then you have Israel going into battle and defeated. Which feels very... it's like God took a step back from them in that moment.
Oh, that seems fair.
Yeah. Just kind of a reminder. Okay, looking ahead, it feels like that moment in Joshua where Joshua's confronted by the angel of the army of the Lord. And, are you for me? And it's not, I'm for God. Are you for God? And it kind of feels like this is a lived-in piece in the wilderness where it's continually finding, are we for God or not?
I feel like, though, we need to remember that it was 400 years the people were in Egypt, right?
There's a lot they've forgotten.
Yeah, and so this is the reintroduction to God. And, I mean, 40 years, that's essentially a generation. And so it has to transition a whole generation before people are really ready to follow God. Not that that's exactly what's going to happen, you know.
Well, it's
in those
imperfect
pages.
people trying to live up to a perfect God.
But it's also about trust, don't you think?
Yeah, but I struggle with it because it's God has proven himself so many times. Why can't you just take that step in faith?
Well, but I mean, they're miraculous things, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to trust a miracle because, by definition, a miracle is not consistent,
Which is true.
except for manna,
Which
which was very
every day
consistent.
for 40 years with the quail.
There was even a recipe in there of how to make cakes from it, you know, because you got
Oh, yeah.
sick of the strange taste. Speaking of food,
Oh.
I don't want to miss chapter 11. So, I mean, not surprising. Here we go. The people complain. And they're upset because they have this strong craving for meat. So in here, you know, they tell us about the manna and all of this. And so Moses is upset. God's upset. Moses like, how can you lay all of this burden on me? Like, are these all my children? Like, how am I supposed to do this? And so you get the 70 elders. And I love this. I'm starting to hear all this spirit language in this chapter. And some of the spirit, as with Moses, will be on them. Right? I'll take some of the spirit that's on you and put it on them. I find that really interesting. And then, you know, basically God says, okay, fine, I'll give you so much meat that you will get sick of it. And then you have Moses saying, but wait, how are you going to do this? The people are, you know, 600,000 on foot and all of this. How are you going to give us meat for a whole month? And it reminds me of the disciples with the feeding of the 5,000. They're like, how are we going to feed all these people out here? And it's so interesting. I'm just like, oh, it's like the same thing. And so God does it. Then God gets mad and he turns it into a plague. So
There's lots of moments of turning things into plagues.
Yeah. I mean, you have to say, though, traveling like that in the wilderness, there probably is a lot of disease.
Which brings you back to the purity laws and that constant struggle.
So there's probably a great purpose that we don't understand. But then, okay, I forgot this. Okay, so here's this desire for Pentecost in a sense. They have this spirit that's being shared. And some of them start prophesying. And you have, again, Joshua telling them, Moses, make them stop. And Moses is like, are you jealous for my sake? Would that all the people were prophets, and the Lord would put his spirit on them. Next verse.
And Moses and the elders of Israel returned to the camp.
Then a wind from the Lord sprang up and brought quail. And I'm like, oh, it's like this foreshadowing of Pentecost. I thought that was kind of cool.
What was... Melinda and I were having a conversation Saturday. She grew up in a Pentecostal background. Well, her faith grew in a Pentecostal background. She's got a Catholic upraising. And we were talking about that element of the Spirit, how it appears in the Old Testament in these different spots. And this foreshadowing of what was to be. And that is a beautiful connection of there is a time that will be. There's a time that gift. And even looking back into Leviticus, where they were going through all of the feast days, and what was it, the Feast of Weeks, 50 days after Passover, where it's almost this, it's coming. It's just down the road. Yeah.
I think That's the question. Would that all the Lord's people were prophets, and that the Lord would put his Spirit on them. Do we live into that as Pentecost people? Like, that is the hope. And then Pentecost, the Spirit comes, and not just for some, but all who believe. It's almost though like now we hide from it.
We have Epiphany in just a couple days.
I love Epiphany.
And kind of with what this is, there's a question and an invitation. How can we let the Spirit move in this year? And you offer a similar challenge every year with this word. How can the Spirit move in your life? What will it bring? What will it show? What will it reveal for you to grow with and in? And that goal is looking towards the Spirit moving and active in our lives and in the church.
Yeah. We have this great gift. I hope we attend to it.
I agree.
So that's a chunk of numbers.
That's a good spot to land on for right now.
I think it is. We are going to try to find a way to keep going through this through the holidays, but we might have to take a weekend pause. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, we'll see where we're at next week, which will be right before New Year's. So if there's not one on January 8th, we'll be back the next week. So.
And we'll try and keep going. I hope that you are finding connections in the midst of your reading or your listening, and wherever God leads us in this new year, may we be ready to follow.
Amen.
Amen.